good morning, folks. I'm Sam Mathewitz. I am the Lockmaster here at Lock and Dam 10 in Guttenberg, Iowa. So I'd like to welcome you all to Lock and Dam 10 for this FarmChat episode. Quick behind us here, as you can see, we do have some barges in the lock chamber. We actually have 9 barges. They are carrying grain, soybean, corn. You know, generally this one is full of soybeans. I looked on the computer and it tells us what's coming down. So that's kind of interesting as it ties right into Farm Bureau and the heartland of America here. That's our primary commodities that we ship is going to be soybeans, corn being number one. It's roughly 20% of our nearly 19 million tons. So if we look at the barges here, and I want to focus on that right now because we have the opportunity to talk to people about them and actually see it. But we have 9 barges in the lock chamber. So they're 3 long and 3 wide, and when you tie the barges together like that, there's big wires that they use, so they're about 1 inch in diameter. So if you can imagine it, 1 inch, golf ball sized, roughly, and that's called a tow. And that's when they tie it together, and then they'll put the towboat in there. We back up. We can't see the towboat because it's behind the central control stand building. They're backing up because you can see where the gate, you can see the timbers on the miter gates there. And we're about to close the miter gates after the towboat puts a line on the wall and secures itself to the wall, and then we can actually lock these barges through, and we'll have to use a mechanical assist device at the downstream end. So way down there, 600 feet away, that's how long the lock chamber is, we can actually pull these barges out, and then we'll lift the lock chamber back up and we'll lock the towboat through, and then they will tie the towboat back to the barges and continue on their journey down south. I don't know where they're going. They might stop in Dubuque. They might stop at another lock before St. Louis and pick up some more barges. Your average towboat will push 15 barges in a tow along the Mississippi River. And the reason they can only go up to 15 is the river is just narrow enough that any more and they can't make the turn safely. So if you can look now, we're actually closing the miter gates on the upstream end. And think of the lock chamber as a big 600 foot long by 110 foot wide bathtub. We don't pump any of the water. We use gravity and current. So on the upstream end where these gates are moving would be like the faucet, and the downstream end, which is way down at the other end where we showed earlier, that's where the drain is. And actually we just have 2 big valves, one on each side, and each of the 4 corners there, 2 to fill and 2 to empty. The whole process takes about 15 minutes to raise or lower a set of barges 6 feet. Of course, today we have high water. The gates on the dam are out. You might have seen that on the video. So we're actually only going to move them about 4.5 inches. So it actually is a lot faster than that. But still, each barge, for reference, holds 1,600 tons of commodity. So to put it in reference, if you put 15 barges together in a tow, each holding about 1,600 tons, that is the equivalent of almost 1,100 semis. That is the same number, or 2.25 miles of train cars, all tied together. And the Iowa DOT creates a really nice website link, and it'll show you how many loaves of bread you can get out of a single barge worth of wheat. It's just a phenomenally large number. We go back and watch over to, can we pan over to the dam a little bit and we'll talk about that? So if you can look over there, you should be able to see the dam, and it might be a little difficult to see that the gates are out right now, but we have them out because we have so much water coming down with the recent rains that we have up north. So a lot of water that comes into Lock and Dam 10 is also fed out of the Wisconsin River, which drains about 2/3 of the state of Wisconsin. And of course we have the stuff that's coming down the Mississippi River as well, and there's many, many tributaries that feed into it. So that's part of why that's out, and that we're only going to move the barges about 4.5 inches today.
What's the 650, 500?
Oh, okay, so yep, that's a great question. You see the blue and white marker signs with numbers on them, and they're a little confusing at first, but if you see the one that's marked 600, so that is for the pilots when they're heading southbound. They know they have 600 feet of 600 feet of chamber left. So the lock chamber, they still have 600 feet to go before they have to stop. and the 50 would be going northbound. They know they only have 50 feet of the lock chamber left before they have to stop. Otherwise, if you look way down underneath the 600-foot mark, you can see how close the barge is to that miter gate. And we leave that little bit of space in there, and it's actually about 3.5 to 5 feet, depending on how it shifts around, because the barges are floating. They're not bolted to the wall right now, and that's a safety error. So that way we can move them around, because they're going to move a little bit with the wind or the little bit of current when we open and close these miter gates. So each of these barges, because they're loaded, is drafting 9 feet. So there's 9 feet of the barge. You think about it, the water line is here. There's 9 feet of that barge below the water line. And that's typical when they come down loaded. So we are required by law to maintain a 9-foot navigation channel. And we do that, and that goes back to a really old law, the Rivers and Harbors Act in the 1920s, if you're interested in more about that. Shelby, do you guys have any specific questions about anything you'd like to talk about? Whether it's
talk about jobs, like different jobs.
Okay, so the different jobs that we have, that's great. So I'm going to start with my job then. So I am officially called the Lock and Dam Equipment Repair Supervisor. So I am the site supervisor, site manager. If you go from the building we're standing on all the way over, you can see the dam. Past the dam, there's a dike. And behind the trees, along the river, there is a railroad track. So I have everything from the Iowa side all the way over to there is my responsibility for the safe operation, maintenance, and the management of it. Helping me here, actually, if we go over, you can see one of our senior lock operators, John Colley's down there. He's walking behind a piece of miter gate machinery. He has the bright chartreuse colored shirt. And then the gentleman with the orange vest is actually a deckhand. Morning, folks. So John Colley is one of 4 year-round shift lead operators that we have on here. Their primary duties are operation, maintenance of the lock and the dam, safe passage of traffic through the lock and dam, and then working to regulate and maintain the pool levels. Of course, right now with the gates out, we don't have to do a whole lot of gate adjustments on the dam, but as the water recedes, we'll get our routine direction from our water regulation office that's up in St. Paul, and they'll tell us, hey, open or close the gates, so we can maintain that 9-foot navigation channel. I also have 5 seasonal lock and dam operators. They operate generally April through November, and same thing, they operate, maintain the lock and dam, provide for safe navigation, interaction with customers, which also includes our recreational boaters that come through. So recreational boaters come through quite often on a warm weekend.
What recreational boaters are?
I will. So recreational boaters are non-commercial people. So your average fishermen, skiers, people in kayaks and canoes, even certain personal watercraft like wave runners. So not every personal watercraft can come through. Sailboats, so we do get a lot of sailboats through, believe it or not. There's quite a few of them. Some are wind powered, and some actually have an auxiliary backup gasoline or diesel fired engine. We will also get a lot of houseboats, so the big cabin cruisers and houseboats that people live on around here. I have 2 more jobs that help me on this site and that I work with them. So I have an assistant working supervisor. Their job is primarily to manage the schedule for the operators. They coordinate daily activities up to weekly activities and take guidance from me, and they also facilitate the safe operation and maintenance. And then I have a site mechanic, equipment repairer. They are my electrician, my primary maintenance personnel for mechanical. They do some utility work such as electrical, plumbing, construction, vehicle maintenance. Everything you see here, that individual, they deal with the maintenance and preventative maintenance of it. So whether it's repairs, helping to facilitate upgrades, just keeping the site going. So everybody's got a part to play. And then we don't have them on site today, but we also have an admin assistant that helps with a lot of the clerical and administrative duties, pay, working on schedules, travel orders if somebody needs to go to a school. All those behind the scenes activities that are no less important, that actually allow the rest of us to do our job. So did that answer your question there on that one?
For the level of education, do they have to have a certain degree, or can they come right out of high school?
So for that, that's kind of interesting. So if for lock and dam operators, there's really nowhere to go get training for it other than on the job. So it is out of high school. and meet the minimum qualifications. Mechanical background, which doesn't need to be too in-depth. You need to understand basic tools and maintenance. So if you ever taken care of your car, equipment on a farm or somewhere else, you probably have the skills whether you realize it or not. And then we do train to suit because we have our own training program. It's called the Inland Marine Transportation System, and it is a concerted effort between the Corps of Engineers, the Coast Guard, the navigation and towing industry. So that would be the towboats that you see, the multiple companies. Some of them that are up here are Artco, Marquette Towing. We'll see them. There is the DOT is involved in that. It's this big group, and it tries to give everybody the same basic understanding. So we all know what to expect when we come in for a lockage, and it does promote, once again, the safety and that common understanding. For the equipment mechanic, their primary job is an electrical background. They need to be able to read prints, understand how electrical theory works, because they do a lot of electrical troubleshooting. Everything you see out here, if you look down at this one piece of machinery right here, that's actually a valve, and you can see the number of electrical conduits coming up out of the concrete. So it's all electrical controlled. We have a series of relays that operate it, and if they can't troubleshoot it and it goes down, we can't continue to work. Beyond that, a lot of it is you're going to get on-the-job training, and then we do offer additional training and leadership for developmental other schools as need be. For myself, I started as an equipment mechanic, so my background was industrial electrical maintenance, and went to school. We did our internal to the St. Paul District Leader Development Program. I graduated 2015 and applied for my current position. Ta-da! So, did that answer your question?
Yep.
Yeah.
Do you want to maybe talk about, I see there's a boat on the deck. What is that?
Okay, yep. So if we zoom over by that 500-foot sign, you can see there's a black and gray aluminum boat with 2 engines on the back. So that is a rescue boat. We do get some training in on-water rescue. It's definitely not our primary mission, but we can render aid in the event that it's needed, and that's what that's for. We also use it as a work boat, and we have partnered with all of our local EMS services, and we offer some training so that way we know what to expect from them in the event of an emergency and vice versa. They know what to expect to us. We have shared equipment in this mutual aid agreement, so it's just another resource out there for the local EMS to use. We use it all the time too, mostly for work or doing inspections on equipment that's on the river.
What, safety precautions do you guys have to use? I see some of your guys have life vests and other guys don't.
Okay, so the gentleman that had the orange life vest that you saw walking around, it was actually a deckhand off of the barge that came through. And then the young man that's going down on the electric cart, so he's wearing that kind of a lime green color with the silver, and that is a standard uniform item that we have, and it identifies us, one, for safety, and two, we stand out so people have questions, not just for safety, but they know, hey, this person works at the lock and dam. So there's a requirement either to wear the shirt, or we have just a regular vest, mesh vest that looks exactly the same. I'm just wearing a standard uniform apparel item shirt that I got through our district program. Otherwise, our dress code is a conservative dress code, and then we dress for the elements. If it's raining, jackets, so on as it gets cold.
The barge is starting to move behind
Yeah,
you.
so remember earlier I talked about how we're going to have to do a mechanical assist to get it out there. So you can't see it, but if you can zoom way down there past the cars, you'll see that gentleman from before in the bright yellowish colored shirt. He's actually operating a winch. So we will put a cable on one of the cavils on a barge, and we will slowly pull them out.
What's a cavil?
So a cavil, if you look over on the far corner of the barge there, you can see that kind of I don't know if you'd call it an upside down T or not. It's on that corner there. It's a cavil. So it's got the 2 posts coming up out of the deck and then a flat surface on top with rounded corners, and that's a cavil. And you'll see them on all kinds of boats, even your smaller John boats that people use on the river to go fishing. And it's a way to secure the big heavy lines to it. If you look on the green barge, you can actually see the wires that secure the 2 barges together, and then they also have a piece of that towing line that they'll use to tie off to the wall. So, interesting fact, that tow line's about 2 inches in diameter. So, like the diameter of my wrist for reference. and it breaks at around 250,000 pounds a square inch. I don't know how to put that into perspective other than that is an incredibly large amount of force. But if a barge has 1,600 tons of commodity and your average pickup, full-size pickup, weighs 3.5 tons, there's a little math in there, but that's a lot of pickups inside that thing. And the barge itself will weigh over 300 tons. And right now, you can watch how it's moving steady, but it's really moving at a slow walk. And it still takes an incredible amount of force to stop it. So with that, I do want to say one thing on the barges. You can see how long that is, and that's only about half the length of a traditional tow of 15 barges plus the towboat. That pilot or captain maneuvering that boat downriver, they're at here and the barges are way out there. They have this blind spot of about 1.5 miles in front of them, and it takes them about that long to stop too. So if you see barges on the river, for safety of everyone, please let them have the right of way. They're going to pass through very quickly. Usually they're doing about 7 miles an hour, which doesn't sound like a lot, but again, that's a lot of stuff moving downriver. And they cannot stop on a dime, and they cannot maneuver as fast as your car can on the road. So
I guess what's the best for people that go on the Mississippi? What would be the best way if they were to come across a barge, what to do?
The best thing to do is realize that they don't stop fast and they can't maneuver as well, and they do have to stay within the buoys so we have a navigation channel. I really wish I could point some out to you, but they're so far down you can't see them. On the river, usually you'll come across a big red or green can sticking up about that far, so maybe as tall as I am out of the river. And a good rule of thumb is if you're within those two buoys, you've got a red one on one side and a green one on the other. That's where the barges and all the commercial traffic are going to travel up and down the river. So you may have to get over and let them pass through, and it is for your own safety. Just give them the right of way. Heed out if you hear a horn, a big air horn honking. It's probably a barge trying to get your attention, because they just want to go about their business too. Quick note, so if you have the red buoys on your right hand, you are actually going, in the case of the river, you're heading upriver into safe harbor, as they say. So red right returning, that's even on the ocean. We'll put in the bays, they put the red buoys on your right. That means you're coming into the safe harbor. Of course, heavy fog, then you get turned around, and we understand that. But the barges generally don't travel in heavy fog because it is a safety issue. Again, they can't see as well, and they're relying on navigation, radar, line of sight, and several other mechanical means. So
cool. I see that these barges are just floating by themselves. They don't have the
towboat
behind them.
Right.
What happens when they get to the end?
So
obviously you need...
Okay, so when they go down, can you zoom down on the wall? Can you see the big yellow buttons that are right in front of us?
Oh, yep.
Yep, so you see them big yellow buttons, and if you just kind of slowly pan, you'll see them going all the way down the lock wall on both sides. So right now, there's a deckhand, and we can't see the gentleman, but he's on the back corner of the barge that's against the side of the lock chamber where we are. And there's another one. Yeah, maybe you can just catch him. You can just barely see the gentleman's vest there. Yep. So he has one of them big towing lines, and there's another gentleman on the same side on the front corner of the barge as it's floating down. So we gave him a nice gentle pull, and we got him moving. And there's actually a third deckhand that is going to walk down the lock wall. He's actually carrying that big line on the front end of this barge, and they're going to throw it on these buttons periodically and slow them down so they can maintain this nice slow travel. And when they get past the lower miter gates down there, so they've got another 350 to 400 feet to go, they'll actually stop. They'll use that line on the front, and they'll actually bring them to a stop, and then the guy on the back will also grab a line. And together, those two ends, they're going to slowly apply pressure with the lines, and they'll bring it to a nice and slow, steady stop.
So what happens when they obviously, you said there can be up to 15 barges. How does that process happen with more?
So we got here right after they did that process. So if you have 15 barges and they come in, and bear with me, I'm going to use my hands. So here's the first 9. Here would be the last 6 with the towboat. There's a special brake coupling right here. And remember those big wires I talked about earlier? There's 2 ways to configure them. One way is for transport, which you would have in these 9 barges between the 2 rows of 3, and then this brake coupling is easier for the deckhands to take apart, but it's just as strong, and that's what they do. They push 9 in, and then they'll do the brake coupling. The 9 will stay there. The towboat would back out with the remaining barges and tie off on the upstream wall, just like the one towboat is here now. You can't see it unless we walk around the side of the building. Then we'll do just like we're here again. We get these 9 barges out. We'll lift the chamber back up, open these miter gates here. The towboat will come in with any remaining barges. They'll put their lines on the wall. We'll lower them down, open the lower gates again. The towboat will slowly come forward, and you got these barges out here, and the towboat will come in, and it'll actually touch up again, and they'll put that coupling back together. And once they get to a point where they're all safe and secure, they'll cast off their lines, and they'll take off down the river. Or if they're going upriver, it's the same process. They'll head upriver.
Okay. What is that? I guess, is that a tugboat right there?
Oh, yep. So behind the Lock and Dam 10 sign, you can see another small vessel. It's got a reddish roof, yellow pilot house. And I don't know if you guys can see it on the smokestacks on the back. There is a red castle on it, just like the same one that's on our flag or on the side of the dam. That is actually a Corps Engineers workboat. So we have a heavy maintenance and repair crew. Every district has one, and they're on site right now. They're actually working on their boat. So we may see those workers running around doing stuff. You'll see them. They got the bright yellow vests on. Those are actually their life vests that they'll wear because they're coming off and on the water. But they're doing some engine maintenance on that boat right now. That boat actually came down from a small project that's about 6 miles upriver, McMillan Bend. They're doing some dredging there. And they're actually beneficial use of that sand that they're pulling out of the navigation channel. It's going up to a project that the Iowa DNR and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife wants to do for McGregor Lake. So that is one of the cool things that we do with this dredge sand, is we find beneficial uses that restore some habitat or improves habitat. In this case, McGregor Lake, they're restoring part of the horseshoe design of it, and they need so many thousands of yards of sand. And we just happen to have a lot of it in that McMillan Bend, so there we go. We pull it out of the bend where it's causing an impact to navigation, and we're taking it upriver, and we're going to make a beneficial use out of it for habitat, which also benefits recreational boat users. You see a lot of boats out there throughout the week, especially on a nice sunny weekend. They're using the sandbars and the beaches and everything that are being built as part of that restoration project.
How many workers are with the barge as it goes down the river?
So on a barge, and I don't know exactly, but usually we will see 4 to 5 deckhands on at any one time, and then you'll have an engineer, which is the title for the marine mechanic that's on shift. I know they've got at least 2 pilots. So if I had to take an educated guess, and it really is a guess, there's at least 24 people on a boat on a shift because they work a 6-hour rotating shift. So 6 on, 6 off. That way everybody works in the day, everybody works at night. But yep, you're going to have a pilot, at least 1 engineer, possibly a helper for the engineer. You're going to have 5 or so deckhands on at any one time, and then you're probably going to have a cook because they're also fed on the boat too. So they got to have at least 3 meals. And I don't know how the midnight meal works out, if it's they make them a hot meal or if it's kind of a conglomeration of leftovers, and I don't understand that part, but yeah.
What is the history, I guess, of a lock and dam? Like, when did people kind of come up with the idea?
So locks and dams, the idea has been around for a long time. Europe used a lot of them. You know, I'm not an expert on that part, but I know we could dig into it and it would go back probably over 1,000 years. Europe's had a lot of locks and dams, and they were much smaller. So in America, and specifically Lock and Dam 10 and the whole system on the Mississippi River, in the 1920s, I'd mentioned that Rivers and Harbors Act was part of it. We used to have boats plying the river ever since forever. People have used the river as a mode of transportation, whether it was a homemade canoe, commercially built boat, to the monstrously sized boats we see now that push 15 barges, 6,000 horsepower. But in the 1920s, they authorized the start of the construction of the 9-foot navigation channel, and with it the locks and dams to maintain that 9-foot navigation channel. So Lock and Dam 10 actually is a navigation lock. We don't have the ability to do flood risk reduction or flood mitigation, even though we do kind of work with it as part of our water regulation on the pool level, but that's a whole nother topic. So they started building this one in 1934, and then we were done in 1938. That was the original construction. The building we're on, and a lot of this area here in front that you can see here is all new stuff within the last 12 years, but the lock chamber and the dam are original to the 1930s. So 85 years old, still going strong. We keep it together. You know, it's a lot of work, a lot of painting, a lot of routine and recurring maintenance, a lot of preventative maintenance. I would say between painting, greasing, and inspections, that just takes up so much time, but you have to, and that's what the same with anything. Your car needs to have regular maintenance, even just an oil change. So,
what side, I guess, does the recreational come from?
Yep.
This one?
Yep. So this lock chamber is the only one that we have on site that's operational. So it's for all boats, whether it's commercial navigation, government vessels like that Corps Engineers boat over there. The Coast Guard has a buoy tender in Dubuque that comes up, or all your recreational boats, your houseboats, fishing boats, canoes, and kayaks. So recreational boats don't pay anything to use the lock and dam. It's just we're here as part of our job. We let them through. We try and get them in with the commercial towboats. Commercial towboats will have priority over a recreational boat, unless you were to call in and say, "Hey, I'm having an emergency. I have a medical emergency on board." In which case, they'll work with us, and we'll definitely work with you to get some help. But as far as how do we communicate with the boats, because that's a big part. We have to be able to communicate with them safely and clearly. So we use Marine Channel 14. That's primarily for recreational craft. I'm sorry, primarily for commercial craft. But recreational craft can buy a marine band radio, and they can listen in on Channel 14. We don't have them available, but on both ends, we have a big sign. It's about this big, 6 foot, blue and white, and it says pull cord for lockage. That's the second way we can communicate with the recreational boats. You pull a cord, and we're going to hear a noise. We have a tone programmed into our phone system, and then we'll talk back through the phone system and give you direction from there. And then some people choose to call us on a cell phone. With that, I would caution you, though, on a busy weekend, we may not be able to answer that phone for a couple of hours. Between commercial traffic and just the tows, they take about an hour and a half to get through because they break apart, and then the recreational boats might be lined up. If it's a beautiful, sunny, 75-degree day weekend, we'll have rec boats all the time. Everybody's trying to enjoy the weather. So, next, do you have any other questions about anything?
Not that I can think.
I mean, some things that have come up in the past then. So I've done these before live, and they ask about fish passing through. And yes, fish do pass through. That's part of the habitat that we work with on the natural resources side. You can see all the trees over there are part of the wildlife refuge. All the way over, and that's what you'll have there. People fish on it. In fact, we have a fisherman on the dike now. He's probably going to walk down a little ways and then throw a line in. So it does offer some really great fishing opportunities. And because it is a wildlife refuge, there is no hunting in there, and it is limited access for fishing. You have to stay on the water, or at least where that gentleman is. As far as if they don't leave a mess and they're not doing anything wrong, disturbing the rocks, that's generally okay. People are going to fish on it and come across it.
So we're in Guttenberg. So across the river, what's that over there?
Way across the river is Wisconsin.
Okay.
So there is no town over there. Cassville, Wisconsin is 7 miles that way. And Clayton, Iowa is 7 miles that way, so upriver. Yeah, there's really nobody right across from us, which it's okay. I mean, if you look at it, you can see that it's got to climb up about 150 feet up the bluff there. There's actually a wildlife refuge on top of that bluff right there. So there is another smaller town. Wyalusing is probably about 3.5, 4 miles that way on the Wisconsin side. It's right there, kind of sandwiched between the bluff and the river. It's a smaller town.
What is that sign with the diamond?
Oh, okay, so that is a great question, Shelby. That white sign's got the orange diamond with a cross and the orange border, so that is a restricted area sign, and that's part of the safety area. So it doesn't necessarily show it the easiest, but in front of the dam, for 600 feet from the dam up to the 600-foot point, And we have our buoys, but I don't know if you can see them from here. We have buoys marking it as a straight line. And that restricted area is for safety. You don't want to get in there. I mean, right now you don't see the current flowing through the dam because we don't have a tree or anything floating through there, and it's kind of hard. But if we go, can you see down here in front of the gates? See how turbulent that water is? I don't know if that shows up. But if you see that, now that is very similar to what's flowing into that dam. Right now, how turbulent that is, and it's just mixing around, and it's actually got a current that'll draw you under. So that's why we have that sign out there. Actually, you might be able to see one of the buoys up front. Yep. Yeah, one of the nice things too about being on the river is all the bugs that come out. But with the bugs come a lot of different birds. Small birds, large birds. Like we have pelicans and bald eagles on site too. So we provide that opportunity.
So there. I see that they are getting about out.
Yep, so they're about to stop, but they have to get past those miter gates down there so we can close them. So they probably have, I bet, about another 65 feet. So once they pass that miter gate, and it's got all those, it's that gray gate-looking structure with all the wooden timbers on it, they'll get a few feet past that, and then they'll actually stop. And you might even be able to hear the strain of that big, heavy rope that they use to stop it, because they'll slowly bring it down, and as that rope stretches, it'll start to sing a little bit, as they say, because the fibers are being pulled on it. Or it'll groan. It's kind of interesting. It is one of the critical points there where safety really comes into play, because if the rope were to fail, it can cause a lot of damage. I'd mentioned earlier too, we talk about the natural habitats around here. I don't know if you can see the big pelican coming in for a landing right there. So we have all kinds of fish. We get a lot of pelicans here. There's another big pelican that's flying. You can barely see it over the dam. But that's the big white pelicans. They're about 6 to 7 feet wingspan. We also have a lot of bald eagles. Here, of course, none of them are cooperating today. They don't come out to show themselves. That would have been great.
On average, how many barge come through the lock and dam in a day?
In a day. So in a 24-hour period. On average, I'm going to say across the entire navigation season, which is almost 9 months long. So we'll use the Saturday following Thanksgiving and go back 8 months is kind of the start of it. So now we're talking like the last half of March. We average about 5 here. Some days it's none, and some days it's 5 in a 12-hour shift. And then in between all those barges, we're trying to squeeze through some of these recreational boaters so we keep them happy, and we provide that service to them too. So it can be a very busy day. And then you can see the barges down there now. They just actually brought them to a stop, and that's in a good, safe spot. They're going to tie off to the wall.
I heard it.
Yep, did you hear? Yep, that tink, tink, tink. Mm-hmm. That's that groaning of it. And so we're almost 700 feet away from that, and you could hear that pretty clearly. Of course, I have the headphones on, so a little harder for me.
How often do they have to replace those ropes? Because obviously they're holding on to a heavy weight and trying to stop and all that.
It kind of depends if they, depends on if they get worn out. Because you think about it, let's use this railing as the edge of the deck or as edge of the lock wall. It's rounded, and then you got to imagine with me here, folks, that this right here is concrete wall. So that rope is kind of rubbing around this spot, and as it wears out, that's what will determine it. So if you look at it, it's just like any other rope. If it starts to fray really bad, they'll replace it. So some of them last 5 months, some of them last 5 weeks. It is really hard to judge. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's hard to judge it. You got to know what you're looking for from a safety standpoint.
So how many feet are each rope long-wise?
About 200 to 250 feet. So that way they can get a lot of life out of it, but also when they're coming into a lock, sometimes they will actually we've got, I don't have one out that you can see, but we have a smaller line that's about the diameter of my thumb, so it's a 1/2-inch diameter, and we've got a weighted ball on the end about the size of a baseball, and we call it a heaving line, and we'll heave it over to the deck hands, and then we'll actually drag that big heavy rope back and put it on a button form, and then they're pivoting and turning off of that rope, so they're kind of trying to get themselves lined up on the approach. So you can barely see it here, but you see the top of that small little boat right across the way? You can just see the white pilot house and the 2 smokestacks. right in front of us. It's behind that piece of miter gate machinery there.
Okay.
So that is a helper boat, and that's an outside vendor. They park their boat there, but they will assist the towboats as they're coming down river, because if you remember that turbulence I showed you earlier, that's what's also drawing the towboats away from the lock wall back into the dam. So it's a safety thing, and it helps them out. And that's another option that's used instead of using that rope tied off to a button to try and pivot on when they're coming in. Without actually being able to show you, it's a little more difficult to explain it, so something for me to work on is trying to come up with some drawings on this that make sense to people. But when you watch it all work together, it's a thing of beauty. So,
I see those gates are
yep, they're closing the lower miter gates, so they're about ready to lift the chamber back up, and we'll bring the towboat in.
So this is where they'll drain the water out.
Fill it.
Fill it, okay.
Fill it, yep. So that right now, we drained it out to get the barges down to lower it. Bear with me, it doesn't look the same because we're only moving them 4.5 inches. Normally it's several feet, and it's much more dramatic and easy to see. But you can see also those gates, how slow they're closing. So the whole chamber is 110 feet wide. Each of those gates weighs around 91 tons, each half of this set of gates. Just large pieces of metal. And if you look back, hey Shelby, can you get a good view of that? So you got the machinery here that moves the miter gates, and I'd like to show people. And then, yep, right there you can see that big I-beam. So that I-beam, for reference, is a foot. It's a foot wide and a foot tall. You know, it's a massive piece of machinery. So that's just, you know, in reference how big everything is around here. All our bolts are huge. The machinery is huge. If you look over, you can see the big gear that actually operates to move the gates, and it generates this immense amount of force. So, in fact, they're filling the lock chamber now. Like I said, we won't see a whole lot of dramatic lift on it, but in a little bit here, a couple minutes, they'll actually be ready to open this other set of gates that we're standing right above. And then we should be able to watch the towboat come in.